So I'm going to look at the question today of learning Irish. We all learn Irish in school as from the age of 5 years old, and yet despite this, so many people lack confidence when they actually have to speak Irish or use it later in life. So fólam na Gaeilge, which means the learning of Irish. And this scene here, actually, just to give you some context, is from the west of Ireland, the County Clare. Now, so this is me, as you can see, and my good friend and business partner, Eilish. And together we have created some learning resources for teaching Irish. And we've both been teaching Irish to adults, particularly for the last few years. And we both come across the same issue time and time again. People don't really have confidence when they're asked to speak Irish. And we notice this really, really often. People are really well motivated very often. They're really positively disposed towards Irish, but yet they lack this confidence to actually speak it. Now, having said that, I believe people very often know far more than they actually think they know. That it's in there somewhere, but just to get it out. I'm going to move on from this picture because I find it quite upsetting. I really think my efforts at jumping here are dismal, and Eilish is a far better jumper than me, so we'll move on. We asked a survey, and we asked this question: how confident do you feel in your current ability to communicate in Irish? This is typical of the responses that we got. A couple of them here. Not confident at all, which I regret. I still have plans to go and learn to speak it. Somebody else says, not great. I can understand it to a degree, but would be unable to have a conversation. And this one at the bottom is when you hear an awful lot of people say, not great. Tá cúpla focal agam. So cúpla focal means a couple of words. And that's an expression you'll hear very, very often in Ireland. Having said that, my goal here today is also, I have a second goal here, and that's that you will all have a cúpla focal when you leave the so be prepared. Just some more examples of the kinds of responses that we got. I'm not very confident. Not at all. I only know single words or phrases. I'm not confident, but I'd give it a go. Somebody else said, Giagwich is about all I could manage. Giagwich means hello. Somebody else, if it's basic greetings and asking to go to the toilet, I'm okay. That's because children in school will often have to put their hand up and say, which is, can I have permission to go to the toilet, please? So that's why we got that response. Somebody else says, my confidence is low. I would be ashamed at my grammar if I had to speak it. And that's a kind of a theme that comes up quite often, that people feel a sense of failure and often, unfortunately, a sense of shame that they don't have more confidence. They think that they should have more. Just to balance that, there were some positive responses, of course, as well. But the vast majority, over 2/3 of them, were of that nature. I'll just give you a flavour of some of the positive ones. A little bit of balance here. Somebody said, yeah, quite good. I'm very confident. Luckily, this person said that. She said, I'm very confident, as I am now an Irish teacher, so that's good. Somebody else said, fairly confident. I love it and I try my best. So keeping those in mind, I decided to look at this in a little bit more detail. And the way I'm going to go about this talk today, first of all, I want to give you an overview of the Irish school system. I'm going to ask the question, why don't we know more? And I have some suggestions as to why we don't. And finally, at the very end, as I said, you get a chance to learn a cúpla focal. So no falling asleep. So just to give you an overview of the Irish school system. Now, bear in mind, I'm talking about the English medium schools only. There are some Irish medium schools as well, some Gael Scoilna. They're really increasing in number, but still the vast, vast majority of children are going to English medium schools. So children start school at 5 years of age. They start with Irish as a subject in school from day one. The primary school teachers, however, do not necessarily have a degree in Irish because they obviously have to teach all of the subjects. They're teaching English, maths, etc. And in general, in primary school, child will have a 40-minute class per day or thereabouts of Irish. Then, moving on to secondary school, it's 5 or 6 year program, depending on if there's a transition year between, which is a non-exam year between junior cycle and senior cycle. Irish is a compulsory subject throughout secondary school. If you want to gain entry into the National University of Ireland, for example, most of the courses you must have passed the Leaving Certificate, the state exam, at the end of secondary school, and you must have your Pass Irish to get into the National University courses. There's a lot of pressure in some ways in secondary school because what a person does after school is really determined by this final exam, the Leaving Certificate examination. Again, in secondary school, there will be a dedicated Irish class every day, usually 45 minutes or so. And at this stage, students are starting to study texts, prose and poetry and so on. Practically always, actually, when the child enters secondary school, they'll take up a third language as well. That would traditionally have been French, but often these days it could be Spanish or German. And they're starting that language from the very beginning. Okay, so it's 13 or 14 years. That seems like quite a lot, right? You'd expect somebody to be pretty confident by the end of that length of time and having put that much effort into learning it. So this is the big question. Why don't we know more Irish after 14 years? I'm going to suggest 3 reasons here. Firstly, the amount of time that is actually spent on it. Secondly, the overemphasis on exams, and maybe actually that might be more correctly, I should have put that as more the structure of the exam, the way the final exam is laid out. And lastly, that there's kind of an underemphasis on teaching the structure of the language, and I'll explain to you why that is as we go along. Let's consider how much time is actually spent on Irish. So we've been thinking, I've been saying we learned for 13 or 14 years. That's not actually strictly true, is it? I mean, the primary school year is about half of the actual year. And again, secondary school, it's a little bit less as well. So now suddenly we're looking at 7 years. So that's quite a difference. Another factor to take into account here is that students in a classroom, it's not as if it's not similar to an adult, a motivated adult trying to learn something for an hour a day for 7 years. There's a lot of passive learning. There's obviously crowd control going on in classrooms, all of that as well. And another big factor here is that very often there isn't much exposure to the language outside of the classroom. So kids aren't going home and hearing too much Irish in the home. They're not hearing it on the streets. They're not often hearing it in the playground. And that obviously impacts the learning outcomes. And I'd also consider there's a variation in the standard of teaching in primary schools in particular. As I said, the primary school teachers don't necessarily have a degree in Irish. They're teaching a lot of other subjects. And just on that point, it's going back a few years, but I think it's probably still quite relevant. In 2006, there was an inspectorate report on the standard of teaching in the primary schools. And it concluded that the standard of teaching was just poor or fair in half of the classes observed. Also, in that same report, 25% of the teachers reported their own Irish as weak. So we have to take all of that into account when we consider the student now is moving on from the primary school system into secondary school system, where they will be expected to study prose and poetry, etc. So as I said, the second possible reason we probably could be more confident or aren't more confident in our Irish competency is because there's an overemphasis on exams, and that begins in secondary school. I have set out here the way the final Leaving Certificate examination is structured. You'll see there's quite a large proportion devoted to prescribed texts. That unfortunately leads to an awful lot of rote learning and memorization and people just trying to learn off the answers to questions, not necessarily understanding, being too interested very often in either the prose or the poetry which is presented. There's a written essay. Again, what happens here is You know, if you're strategic and you look at all the old exam papers, you can give a good estimate of what's going to come up this year, and you start learning off set phrases. Probably this year they'll consider coronavirus or something like that, and you go learning these set phrases. And then finally, this oral examination. 40%, it's a huge allocation of marks for a 20-minute exam. And that's an exam where the student goes into a room and there's an examiner there, and then they have a 20-minute discussion, and I'll explain how that works in a minute. We asked, or in our survey, how did people feel about the way Irish was taught at second level? And these are the kind of responses that we got. There's lots of rote learning. Irish was book-based, too much literature. And this is the key. I learned everything I needed to know off by heart. It was all to get us through an exam, no joy in it. And sorry, just come back to that, learning everything you know off by heart, and then like regurgitating it in an exam. What tends to happen a month later, you know, the next day, you've pretty much forgotten all of that, right? So it isn't really embedded learning going on there. And it's a good point in particular where somebody said, we really had no business trying to understand stories and poems when we couldn't have a simple conversation in it. Now, I mentioned the oral examination there, the 40%. So let's just consider that for a minute. So you would imagine if there's going to be 40%, there's a huge incentive for somebody to really get good at speaking Irish. And in fact, it's just going back to 2007, the marks of the oral exam were increased to this 40% with that goal. However, it didn't really have the desired effect. And the reason for that is because of the way the oral exam is laid out. So 15% of, well, it's not 15% or 40%, but it's 15% of the overall Irish exam goes to this series of pictures here. You can see I have one example of them here. So every year for the Leaving Certificate, 20 picture series are sent around to the schools, and they're the student knows when they go into the exam, one of these picture series is going to be handed to them, and they're going to be asked to describe the pictures. This one here is Cailteas na Shléifte, Lost in the Mountains. What does your student do who has to learn off reams of stuff? They go off trying to learn set phrases for this here, Lost in the Mountains. That's not going to be potentially too much use to you. You know, meeting friends, talking about lots of other things. You know, it's a very limited way of learning a language. So that's your 15%. And then a 5% goes to reading a poem. So one of 5 poems is handed to the student. They go in, and again, it's a memorization exercise. They recite this poem to the examiner. And then finally, the general conversation, 20% here. So this is where you think we might start to up our level of competency at speaking Irish. However, what happens here is, again, there's a set topics that are very likely to come up every year. So a student will learn off lots of passages about my home place, my family, my pastimes. And, you know, you try to keep the examiner going down the track you want him to go. Don't let him veer off to some topic that, you know, he's not meant to bring up. Actually, there was a very funny short film about this. It's called Lip Service. In this clip, it's a real skit. It's obviously an exaggeration. But this one of the early students who goes in, she wants to talk about something in particular. So even though the examiner is asking her questions, she's not really answering him. She's just continuing down the road she wants to go. And then you have a few others, a series of students who come in one after the other. And these students clearly have all learned some little story off by heart, and we'll see them, they are all following one after the other, telling us the same story. If you want to look it up yourselves, later on YouTube, there's a short film, it's about 20 minutes long, and it's called Lip Service, Gaeilge, G-A-E-I-L-G-E. It's worth a look. You'll really understand what I'm talking about then. So the third reason I wanted to look at was this idea that we don't really teach the structure of the language very well to students at any point along their school learning journey. And in particular, I think we need to teach this because obviously English being a Germanic language and Irish being a Celtic language, There's really some quite fundamental differences. And because often we don't teach the language structure very well, there's this kind of myth that Irish is a particularly difficult language. So here we have from our survey again, somebody who says the structure of the language was not taught like it was for other languages. It seemed to rely on having an ear for it. Or I think one reason I did better at German was that I began it with a blank slate when I entered secondary school. There's a reliance on the fact that because the child has gone through 8 years of primary school, that they should have enough on their ear by that stage to kind of get away without really drilling into the structure of the language too well. Okay, I'm going to actually give you some examples of the structural features of Irish, and these would apply to the Celtic languages as well. If we look at one thing in particular, the word order, so English and the Germanic languages go on a SVO word order. So Paul runs home, the subject comes first, and then the verb, and then the object. That gets reversed in the Celtic languages. We have the verb, we put the verb at the start of the sentence. So we're actually saying, runs Paul home, and if he gets there fast enough, eats he the cake. Okay. Another feature is that if you have any Irish friends, you might know we're not good at giving yes or no answers. Maybe this is why. So the question here, this is a ridiculous question, because if he is Irish, he does drink tea. But anyways, it's an Olin sé té. And the reply to that isn't yes or no. It's drinks, or which is Olin, or not drinks, which is ní Olin. You don't even need to repeat the pronoun in that case. This causes quite a lot of confusion. Initial mutations, I mean, it sounds awful. What it just means is that the pronunciation of the first consonant of a word can change. And there's different reasons why this happens. And there's a system to how it happens. So if we take the consonant C and a word like kota, which is coat, and there's two ways in which the initial sound of that word can change. One is under a system called lenition, and that's marked in writing by putting the letter H after the first consonant. So your kota changes to chota. You use the back of your throat a little bit more. And the second system or way in which the initial sound of a word can change is using a system called eclipsis. And that's marked by what we call an uru, putting a letter in front of the initial, what was the original first letter of the word. And for the letter C, that letter would be G. And in this case, eclipsis, as you can imagine, something's hiding something else. So actually what happens here, we lose the C sound altogether, and the word now is gota. So here in this example, we have the word for his, her, and their is the same. That word is a. But it's important that the student understands what needs to happen next. If you want to distinguish between his, her, and their, you need to get your initial mutation right. The pronunciation needs to change. That can be quite a difficult concept for students. Another one which causes some confusion, and we don't have this in English either, is this copula, or uncouple. And that's essentially, took the definition down, it's a linking particle used to identify or classify something. The easiest way to explain this is for me to give you an example. So in English we would say, I am running, and we'd also say, I am a teacher. If you think about that, they're actually two very, very different concepts. And yet we're using the same verb, we're using to be, I am. The verb to be in Irish, if you want to say I am running, you say tá mé, I'm doing something, tá mé ag rith. However, if I'm describing something about myself, classifying or identifying, I need to use this uncouple. Instead, I have this different formulation that must be used, is múinteoir mé, which essentially, I suppose the nearest translation I could put onto that would be something along the lines of, it's a teacher, me. Okay? And this really can be very difficult for students. Now, this is not a feature peculiar to Celtic languages, of course, but Irish, like many other languages, distinguishes or classifies words into feminine and masculine words. And I just brought this into this talk because I like the picture of the dog and the pig. But so the word for a dog is madra, and the word for a pig is muck. And then if a word is feminine and you put the definite article, you put the word the in front of it, it causes lenition. You have to change the pronunciation of the next, of the first syllable or the first consonant of the word muck. So muck, when you say, is a pig, and then when you say the pig, it becomes on wuck. Muck on wuck. Nothing happens to the dog, to the masculine words. Madra on madra, it's the same. This is important to know because there's a genitive case in Irish as well, and unless you know whether a word is feminine or masculine, you can't construct your genitive case correctly. So here we have two examples. The masculine word, sail an wadra wan, which means the life of the white dog, which there's no equivalent exact translation or idiom in English, I think, but it's like an easy life. And I was wondering about that, and somebody said to me, it's because farm dogs, if you were a farm dog and you're a white farm dog, you get to stay at home, you don't go out working or something, I don't know. And then the on the pig's back is ermwin na mucka, and you can see the genitive case there. Oh yeah, and then one more feature we might just look at quickly is distinctive to Celtic languages, prepositional pronouns, and this is where your preposition and your pronoun combine to make a new word. So think of any of the prepositions in English, with, under, on, and so on. When you say with me, with you, with him, with her, there's no change to the word with. However, what happens in Irish, when you put the preposition and the pronoun together, they crush in together and make a new word. So with is le, and then with me is le me, and that becomes liom. With you is le, and tu, and that becomes lat. Here's another example. On is on me is urum. And me, and now we have urum. And on you would be earth. So we have an example here. Tá óhas urum. And then we have tá brón urum. Óhas is the word for happiness, and brón is the word for sadness. So if you think in English we say I'm happy, or we say I'm sad, in Irish, what we actually say is, happiness is on me, or sadness is on me, which is a nice way of thinking about it, because obviously it's on you now, and maybe, you know, later today, it'll be gone again. So we have looked at some of the main structural features, the word order, yes and no, initial mutations. I mean, unless there's some understanding of the initial mutations, students are just left there going, will I throw in a H or not? And it's kind of 50-50 every time. No understanding of what this is all about. It's about a change of pronunciation. And there is enough they haven't heard enough to be able to catch it on their ears, perhaps. So, you know, they really need to be taught this, or what it's all about. And like I said, this leads to confusion. And then if you're a little bit confused, obviously your confidence in speaking a language is going to go down. Now, not to give you all some hope, there's that's the difficult, some of the more interesting aspects of Irish. Of course, there's some really, there's good news as well. And in Irish, we only have 11 irregular verbs. You compare it to somebody trying to learn English, they have like something like 200 irregular verbs. So that's give you a bit of hope. So this is my message, that we need to get to grips with the basis of the basic structures of the language. The students need to get a good understanding of this, and probably a good point to get this really, you know, to really get the students to learn this would be at the junction between primary and secondary school. And that would mean that, you know, when a student then has to read their prose and their text, it's not that they need to perfectly know how to conjugate into the genitive case every time, but it's just that when they see it in the text, they can kind of go, oh, I guess that might be what's happening there. That's why there's a H there. That's why there's an uru there. That will help a lot. Teachers are really, you know, they have to cover the exam course, so that's why rote learning tends to, unfortunately, kick in. Now, we want to go from that to that. But now, it's your turn. Okay, so my plan now is to teach you all Copula focal. Are you ready? Yeah, I don't get a great sense of enthusiasm here. The last time I did this was with quite a smaller group of people. Actually, it was only about 20 people. And I'm going to be asking you to think about how would you say this in Irish? And that time, everybody started shouting the answer back at me. And there were only 20 people, but it got a little bit loud. So what I'm going to ask today is when I ask you, how do you say something in Irish? Most of you, I'd like you just to kind of think about it in your head or say it very, very quietly to yourself. I'll probably ask a few of the people in the front row to give it a go. You're in the firing line. Okay. So, are we ready? So I'm going to start with some commands, first of all. The reason I'm starting with commands is because that's the building block for all of the tenses of the verbs that come after that. So if we can say, sit down, stand up, you then, once you know the patterns, you'll be able to say, I will sit down, I sat down, I would sit down, etc. First command, you want to tell somebody to eat something. The word for eat is I. A short word, I. Okay, good. And the word for it is a. So how would you say eat it? I. Very good. I. And the word for drink is ol. So how would you say drink it? Ole. Think of Spanish. Ole. All right? So that's drink it. Ole. The word for and is agus. How would you say eat it and? Agus. So eat it is, it's a short word. I, and eat it and? Agus. Very good. I agus. And now if you want to say eat it and drink it, I'll ask you.
I agus o a.
Very good. I agus ol a. Excellent. The word for now is anish. Right, think of sharpish. You want to do something now. Anish. So how would you say eat it now? Yourself. Very good. You have the words correct there. I anish. In Irish, what we actually say, we put it at the end. So instead we are saying eat now it. How would you say that?
I anish a.
Excellent. I anish a. And how would you say drink it now, which is drink now it?
O anish a.
Good. Ol anish a. What about eat it and drink it now? Well, any takers? Eat it. I and agus.
O.
Very good.
Anish a.
Excellent. Very good. So I agus ol anish a. Eat it and drink it now. Excellent. The word for tea is very similar. Tay. How do you say drink tea? Old tay. Drink tea now? Old tay anish. So it's only if it's it, you put it at the end. But if it's tea, we put it in the middle. Okay, the word for do or make, you want to tell somebody to make tea or whatever, is Dane. Do we have any Danes in the room? So think of this words about doing and making. Do it or make it. Dane. The Danes are very productive, right? They're good at doing things. They're good at making things. They get it done. Okay, so how do you say make it? Dane a. How about make it now, which is make now it? Dane anish a. Very good. Okay. In Irish, we don't have an indefinite article. So if I want to say in Irish, make a cake or make cake, it's the same. So a cake and cake, we don't have an indefinite article. The word for cake is cóca. Cóca, right. So how would you say make a cake? Dane cóca, make a cake. Dane cóca. Make a cake now? Dane cóca anish. Now, what about make it now, which is make now it? Dane anish a. Excellent. Okay. There is a word for the, however. So we've no word for a, but we have a word for the. The word for the is on. How would you say the cake? An cóca. Okay. How do you say make the tea now? Dain an té anish. Come on. Excellent, excellent. Okay, a couple more commands. Not just eating and drinking and making. If you want to tell somebody to leave, the word for leave is fog. 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 Think about a ship, right, with a foghorn pulling out of a harbour, right? Leave. Fog. How would you say leave now? Foganish. Excellent. Okay, leave now. Or you might say to somebody, leave it. Fog a. Fog a. Excellent. Okay. The word for stay, similar to leave, stay, it's fun. 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 Okay? You want to stay somewhere because it's good fun. 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 Okay? Fun. Fun. How do you say stay now? Fun-anish. How about stay now and make a cake? Yeah?
Fun-anish agus dain cáca.
Go on. Excellent. Fun-anish agus dain cáca. How about stay now and drink tea?
Now, I guess, all day.
Excellent. Fun-anish agus ol té. The word for there is unshin. Unshin. Right there, your shin. Unshin. Okay? How do you say leave it there? Be careful. Leave it there would be leave there it. Leave is like the ship pulling out of the harbour. Fog on shin a. Fog on shin a. Good. Okay, let's move on. You want to tell somebody not to do something? The way we tell somebody not to do something, don't eat it, don't drink it, you know, is we put a particle in front, which is no. No. We put that in front of the command. Okay? How would you say, don't leave? You're great fun. No fog. No fog. Don't leave now. No foganish. Good. Don't leave it. No fog, eh? What about don't leave it there, which is don't leave there it? Good. No fog on shin, eh? The word for but is ach. Ach. Okay? If you want to say to somebody, stay there. Stay. You know, you're having fun somewhere. Fun. Stay there, but. Fun. Good. Okay. Stay there, but don't eat it. Great. Excellent. Fun and shin ach no hi a. Now you might hear when I say no hi. I didn't say no I. It's no hi. There's pronunciation. There's two vowels coming together, so we introduce a soft H there. Fun and shin ach no hi a. Good. Stay there, but don't drink it. Hole. Good. Fan and shin ach no hole. Come on. Good. Now, just coming back to that thing about the word order, as I said, if we want to say I run, or in English we say I run home, in Irish we say run I home. Or I drink tea would be drink I tea. Okay? Same. Now, keep that in mind, to make the past tense in Irish, when the command begins with a vowel, which we have ol and I, we want to say instead of eat it, drink it, we want to say I ate it or I drank it, we put the letter D in front because it's done, right? D for done. So ol would become dole and I would become di. Right, the word for me or I is may. May. Okay, so how do you say I ate? Brilliant, fantastic. Di may, di may. How do you say I ate the cake? Di may an cáca. How would you say I drank the tea? an té. Good. I'm with a very talented bunch. It's really good. Dún mé an té. You're fantastic. That's really brilliant. So you all have cúpla focail in it, right? I just have a couple more I want to finish up with here, so you can all relax. Once more. Just the way I was teaching there, and actually it's the course myself and Eilish we put together. It uses this Michelle Thomas method, and this is what it's about. It's about building up the structure and making sure that you understand each concept before we move on to the next. So there's a great focus on the structure from the student's point of view, and continually building on this structure gives the student a lot of confidence. And the other thing is, the student has to work it out for themselves. You can't just sit there passively. You have to work it out. And if you work something out, chances are you're going to remember it, rather than rote learning something off by heart. And then the teacher, of course, using this sort of method, has to know what to teach and when to teach it. So, for example, I did the past tense with using a command that began with a vowel there, because if I want to do the past tense of a command that began with a consonant, I'd have to run through lenition with you, because that's how we make the past tense. You add the shevu, the letter H, into the command to make the past tense. Just the final question, to come back to our original survey, we asked, are you motivated at all to increase your knowledge of Irish at the present time? And the really encouraging thing here is that even though people have the vast majority, over 2/3, have limited confidence in terms of their own Irish, they're still later in life as adults really positively disposed and motivated to learn it and would like to learn it. And we think that probably the missing piece in the jigsaw here is getting a good handle on the structure of the language, because you can't go through 13, 14 years of schooling and not pick up a lot of vocabulary. They have a lot more vocabulary. They very often know an awful lot more than they think they do. So over 70% of our respondents were very well motivated, and that corresponded with an online poll in 2017, and 25,000 people answered that one, and that was the same result they got there. 70% of people were more motivated, were positively motivated towards Irish. And I think, because it's almost lunchtime, I thought I would just finish with a little phrase in Irish, which is Tá ocras orm, which means hunger is on me. So I'm, and actually just to compare it with Gaelic, you can see how similar the two languages are. Ha an takras arum. They're very similar. And Gura Mahagif. Thank you very much.